All right, so welcome, and it's really glad to see you all today at this webinar, which is co-organized by NGI Tetra and NGI Zero. The webinar is about funding your open source project, and today we'll be talking about different ways of achieving sustainability for your project, as well as an experience sharing session on crowdfunding. Let's see if I can. All right. And before we start, I just wanted to say with a few words about NGI Tetra. So we are a project that is not funding different projects, but we are providing services to all projects that have received funding from the NGI initiative.
Greta, you're muted.
I've been muting the entire time.
Oh no, just like one word, 2 words, no problem.
That's interesting. All right. All right, so NGI Tetra, and as I mentioned, then we offer services to companies that have been funded by different other NGI projects, such as most of you. So how do we do it? We provide trainings, and we do that mostly through boot camps or webinars such as this one. And we have trainings on various topics such as IP, sales, leadership skills, investments, and many more topics. We also offer mentoring, and this is a service that's available for those companies that have been through the boot camps. And we also work with building networks, so getting access to relevant support organizations in your area, connecting with investors, corporations for collaborations, if that's something that you are interested in. And for the companies that have been through, or the projects that have been through our boot camps, we also offer individual master plans. So those are sort of plans where we discuss what are some of the things that you need to develop and how are what are some of the best ways to do that. All right, let's see. I just wanted to mention a couple of the upcoming webinars that we have going on for various NGI projects. And firstly, next week, we're doing a webinar on optimizing your access to capital and understanding the fundraising process. So that's focusing more on angel investing in the VC route. So if that's interesting to you, then you can join. Then on October 5, we're cooperating again with NGI Zero and NGI Pointer to talk about smart use of IP in the next generation internet. And then on October 8th, we have a webinar on visibility and growth hacking. So number of topics, and we have very many topics coming up in October and November, so you can keep an eye out. Here's the website where you can check them out as well. And also our Scale Up Bootcamp, which is happening at the end of November, and where you can get individual master plans, work with mentors and coaches, and get training on a number of topics. There will be more information on our website about that as well. You're all welcome to apply and join the bootcamp. Yes, and yes, Michael also mentions that when I say companies, I mean other organizations. That means that our services are not only for companies, but all projects that are funded by NGI. So they can be projects that are done by scientists, research organizations, SMEs, etc., etc. So a number of organizations. But I would like to hand it over to Joost to say a few words about NGI Zero and Annette.
Thank you very much, Kat, for that introduction. And thanks for mentioning like the upcoming webinars. I think that's great for people to get to know like what's coming down the road, because I think that those are very interesting events. A quick note about NGI Zero. Let me upload my slides. One moment. Should be here in about a minute. But I can introduce myself also without them. Yes, that's one. Thank you all for being here. As Greta mentioned, this event was co-organized with NGI Tetra and with NGI Zero. Melanie of Radically Open Security also is a member of the NGI Zero consortium. as we like to call it. And currently, this is a program that was part of the is part of the Next Generation Internet Initiative, an R&D funding program by the European Commission. And slides are going along. As you can see, these were two of the first open calls as part of the NGI initiative, research and innovation action, which in this case means, or in our case means that we're funding projects with small to medium-sized grants, and that by nature we fund open source and open hardware projects in those spaces. One focusing on search and discovery, improving search discovery and discoverability, which are important dimensions of open search. And the other focusing on privacy and trust enhancing technologies. As you can see here, we have a number of base principles that we follow when selecting and funding projects and supporting them. One of them being that they have to make their results available as under free and open source licenses, and that we also help them on a number of critical aspects. For example, one of them being security, where the awesome people at Radically Open Security take a look at what their projects are doing and whether they can spot any obvious security flaws that they should address, but also accessibility, localization, those kinds of things, standardization. I'll go over the slides relatively quickly because I have way too many. We are the NLNet Foundation, which is a foundation going back to the early 80s, supporting open source software and open standards coming from the early internet networking pioneering of those days. And ever since that time, we've been funding as a charitable organization all sorts of projects. We have described here like a very lightweight application procedure where we like to take the brunt of the administrative work and let people actually do their work for the public good and for the technology commons. And I guess that's it from my side. We currently have open the Next Generation Internet, the Search and Discovery call. The Privacy and Trust Enhancing Technologies call has been closed for some time, where we address a number of issues. The NGI Assure call is also open right now as sort of like a follow-up of the PET, Privacy and Trust Enhancing Technologies call, and a brand new fund, the User Operated Internet Fund, which we're also excited to be able to host. So do check that out. It's all on our website. At that, I will stop talking and leave the word to Grete and to Melody to actually get into the content of today. Thank you. Grete, can you hear me? Yes, I think you're muted.
Are you going to give an introduction, Greta? You're muted, Greta.
Yes. Oh, okay. I think it's the tech is not working. Okay. No problem. I can also give a brief introduction. As Grete mentioned, today we are very excited to talk about organizing funding, crowdfunding, but also other means of funding for open source projects, as we feel that is like a very important topic to discuss in the case of open source work, which is a lot of the time done in spare time and with little to no funding. So to make a lot of those efforts more sustainable, we think it's good to discuss funding opportunities and approaches. And with that, we're very excited to have Dr. Melanie Reback of Radically Open Security with us. Radically Open Security is a not-for-profit computer security consultancy based in Amsterdam. And Melanie is also co-founder of that organization and also works on a number of approaches to non-profit business model development for social ventures. And given that experience, we would very much like to have her share her vision on this today and how this applies to open source funding. So hopefully we can all benefit from her insights into this. So with that, Melanie, I'd like to give you the floor. I'll make you presenter so we can get things rolling. Let's see. You are presenter. You should be. So you're able to switch slides.
Excellent.
Yes.
Can we, I don't have a slide deck. Can we maybe get rid of the slide decks that are currently on the screen?
Will do.
Okay, cool. So, thanks everyone. You can see me full screen now? Just checking.
Yes, you're visible.
Okay, excellent. Great. So yeah, thank you everybody today for joining. I assume that all of you are here because you have an affinity with open source and because you want your project to survive. Basically, I'm going to talk a bit today about funding, and I'm also going to talk about how not to get funding, you know? And I really hope that my presentation today, I saw that next week you've got, a course on how to create FOMO in VCs. Really, I think the emphasis today more is going to be how to create FOMO in those VCs, because quite simply, you don't need them. So, there's a couple things I think that open source projects in general tend to have a problem with. The first problem is that many open source projects get subsidy. And there's a bit of a incorrect notion sometimes that subsidy is a business model. It isn't. You know, I've spoken sometimes with the NLNet Foundation, you know, with Michiel and other people, and also with SEDN funds and some of the other open source funding agencies. And I can really tell you what their number one frustration is. Their number one frustration is that they give all of this subsidy to these really great, passionate, founders who are starting these great open source projects. But the problem is the money, like the moment that subsidy runs out, the project falls over. It's kind of, explainable if you think about it, because most open source project leads, first of all, we tend to be somewhat anti-capitalistic. To kind of put it mildly, I think the majority of people who are really heavily into open source, we think that business is evil, we think that money is evil. So anytime somebody would suggest, creating a startup, starting a business, the first thing we think is, I don't want any part of that. And we sort of think that, going the subsidy route instead is some kind of way of being able to allow us to be more pure, and to sort of stay free of commercial influences. I totally understand this because I also used to be an academic myself, also my own personal background. I used to be an assistant professor of computer science at the Free University of Amsterdam. And, at a certain point, I switched over to the industry. At a certain point, I also started running my own company. And the other problem that open source projects tend to have, besides getting kind of addicted to subsidy, is that they instead, if they decide that they want to make a startup, then their next action is they go to a startup incubator, where they're basically taught what I would call the Silicon Valley model of entrepreneurship. This can basically be summarized as 3 parts: capital, scale, exit. In other words, the very first thing that happens is what's shoved right in front of your nose is a PowerPoint slide of an exponential curve, and they tell you, okay, guys, this is what you're supposed to do. The next thing that usually happens somewhat shortly afterwards is they push you in the direction of venture capitalists, as soon as possible. And they also tell you that an early indicator of your success is to be able to secure VC funding, angel funding, take your pick, And, so you can basically take that cash, use that cash, and then be able to use that to support your exponential growth. The last part of it, of course, is, the exit. And the problem here is that we're told also as founders that the exit, in other words, selling our company or otherwise going public on the stock market, having an IPO, we are told that exiting our company is the definition of success, right? And if we want to be extra super successful, then we do that several times, But let's stop and think about this. First of all, what about building companies that are actually meant to be there for the long term? See, the problem here is that these kinds of incubation, venues are really teaching us bad habits. What a lot of people don't understand about funding is that once you actually have funding, it can actually get in your way. Now, I know that this is going to sound really counterintuitive, but I can tell you exactly what the problem is. When you have a big pot of money, right? What you're going to do as a developer is you are going to spend time building what you want to build. In other words, you've got a project, you've got a hobby, it's your baby, much of your identity is probably tied up in it, and you are going to spend all this money on research and development trying to build this perfect thing, that, hopefully with the idea that once that money runs out, you're going to have something that is sufficiently great that everybody's going to see it, and then, people might start buying it. Unfortunately, that's actually not really the way that it works, at least not most of the time. The problem with having this big pot of money is that when you are building what you want to build, this can basically create a disconnect from what the market actually wants. And once you actually have something, at that point, trying to retrofit product market fit into your product, by that time, it's sort of almost too late, because then the only option that you have at that point is either to go looking, for more capital, or otherwise, oftentimes with VCs, which basically causes you to lose more control over your company. Or the alternative is just to have the whole company fall over, which in the case of open source projects seems to happen quite frequently. So, the question really then is sort of, how do we get around this? Now, what you can do, and it requires a slightly different way of thinking, is actually canonized quite well in a book called The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. So the Lean Startup, I'm sure many of you have heard of it. I'm sure many of you have probably read it. It's the kind of book that everybody reads, but then, at a certain point after you've read it, you kind of forget it and you tend not to actually implement what's in there. What he always recommends is starting with some kind of an MVP, a minimum viable product, and then basically using revenue from actual paying customers to collect validated learning. And then at that point, once you've sort of collected, and really what you're trying to listen to is you're trying to figure out what the market is actually willing to pay for. The problem here is that if you ask people, like, what do you think about what I'm building? Do you like it? People will always give you the same answer. People will always say, oh, yeah, it's great. I love it. It's wonderful. This is the best thing ever. Wow, go you. This is awesome. But then when you ask them, okay, great. Do you want to order one? They're like, well, no. And people react this way quite simply because, they're not assholes. It's because they want to be friends to you and they want to support you, and, this is their way of basically trying to be positive and encouraging. But the real problem here is that they're lying to you, actually, and in basically telling you that they like it, but then in being unwilling to pay for it, it turns out really that what people are willing to pay for is the only actual, real, trustworthy form of input that you can accept from people. Otherwise, that input tends to send you into the wrong direction. Now, the nice thing, a lot of people have forgotten with starting businesses that you don't necessarily need capital to start. A lot of incubators will tell you, you need VC to start. You need, the angel round, you need the seed round, you need some form of capital to get you started. Turns out, actually, that's not true. I mean, if you think about it, the whole Silicon Valley ecosystem is what, like 30 years old? And you have to stop and think, well, how did people actually start businesses before VCs were even invented? Somehow we still managed to start companies. And how did you do this? Well, oftentimes we did it by bootstrapping with launching customers. I mean, sometimes people would get loans from family and friends, or perhaps from a bank. But the whole VC idea of getting, these huge cash infusions and growing exponentially, that was not even a thing, before 30, 40 years ago. We have to remember this. Now, the problem really with the whole VC system, and I think what, some evidence is that it's actually not working the way we would like it to be working. First of all, we all know the statistic that 90% of startups fail. 90%. That's pretty dismal if you ask me. So really, what we are doing is when people start with this big pot of capital, what happens is you start hiring, right? You start getting people, but people are always the most expensive thing. And then what happens is your company is in the red, right? And then basically that's called your burn rate. If you take the amount of capital that you have and you divide it by your burn rate, then what you have is called your runway, which is the period of time where you can basically survive before things fall over. Now, if you start by, for example, doing something like creating services, like selling a service of some kind, then what happens is you can actually start without needing a big pot of capital. So, for example, let me just explain what I did with Radically Open Security. So Radically Open Security, in our particular case, we are a platform organization. So when I say platform, I mean platform in the same sense as Uber and Airbnb are a platform. The only thing is we have a nonprofit business model. And when I say nonprofit, what I mean is we are registered as something called a fiscal fundraising institution, which is sort of a really archaic business model from the Dutch church. Because sometimes churches want to do some kind of commercial activity. Then they basically take that money, it goes back again to the church with a tax benefit. A famous example of this is the Language Institute Regina Caeli, otherwise known as the Nuns of Vught. It's a famous language institute in the Netherlands. It was started by a bunch of nuns. The institute itself is independently operating. It's very high quality. Our queen here in the Netherlands actually learned her Dutch at that institute. She's originally from Argentina. And the money basically goes with the tax benefit back to the nuns again. See, that's how it works. Now, what we decided to do is we decided to make our so-called, our commercial spin-off, the, Radically Open Security, so basically an IT security company. And we decided to make our so-called church the NLNet Foundation. So it turns out that it doesn't actually have to be a church. It turns out that it can actually be any foundation that is certified by the government as being for the public good. What this business model does is we are required to give 90% of our profits or more to this charity. So basically, in the last, the way that it works is I have to run a business. So basically, I have revenue, I have paying customers. What a lot of people don't understand when they hear nonprofit business, they think we work for free. That's not what it is. We are a social enterprise, which basically means we have paying customers. They pay us market conform rates, and we also have staff, and we pay market conform rates to our staff. We only start talking about profits after everyone has paid us, after we have paid everyone else, and also after we have made all necessary reinvestments in building a platform, for our business, which basically means, we have to pay for IT and infrastructure and automation and software development and project management and process and, all these kinds of things that a company needs. But after all, we can also create reserves, by the way, for next year if we know a big expenditure is coming up. After that is when we have our profit. That's basically the cash that we don't need in the company. That's what we would otherwise be dividending out of the company if we had shareholders. Now, 90% of that profit, basically, we give to the NLNet Foundation. And of course, NLNet uses that for funding, projects like you guys. And the last 10% is our cash flow buffer. And basically, we need that cash flow buffer for being able to actually run a business. It turns out, that in the last 6 years of my company's existence, we gave over €500,000 to NLNet. And we actually just got the numbers back from the accountants. Joost, you'll also be very happy to know that in 2020, which was the pandemic year, no less, we're giving another donation of close to €250,000 again to NLNet. So probably it's only going to take another year or two when we're already going to be close to reaching €1 million in donated money.
Congrats.
Yeah, thanks. So, it's working, right? And nobody, because most of the time with social enterprise, people tend to think, oh, we give 5% of our profits, we give 10% of our profits. But literally in this particular case, we are giving 100% of our extracted profits to charity. The reason why we're doing it this way is because we want to basically first of all, get people thinking about what can possibly be done with business. And the second thing also is we want people to consider how business can be used as a form of activism. Many of us who are involved with open source, we tend to run these projects because we believe in something. We want a freer world, a more open and transparent world. We're trying to support civil society. We're trying to support freedom of speech and information. It turns out actually that using business as a means of cross-subsidizing your activism is a really powerful tool. See, the problem with both subsidy as well as with VC funding is you basically get that money once, you spend it, and then it's gone. But Muhammad Yunus, he's a Nobel Prize winning economist who invented microfinance and the Grameen Bank. He says it best when he says that customer revenue is the most powerful form of financing. See, the reason for this is because if you can come up with some kind of a service where you have paying customers and those paying customers are happy, then what happens? They come back. And what you get is you get a kind of compounding effect in the same way that you get compounding from interest in a bank account. Okay, maybe not nowadays with the really low interest rates, but or negative interest rates. But the point that I'm making though is if you do have interest, basically it's like you have the money that you get interest on that, then the interest gets interest, and eventually you get this compounding effect. It's the same thing with customers because you start with a single launching customer, then you get a second customer, and then hopefully the first one comes back. Then you get a third customer, and then hopefully the first, and then maybe the second also sometimes comes back. And in such a way, the revenue of your company compounds. See, it's not exponential growth, right? It's not the kind of explosion, but let's just admit it exponential growth is nonsense. Because if you think about exponential curves, if you think about the pure nature of exponentiality, the rate at which it grows, it is impossible to keep that up forever. Just purely by its nature. The whole purpose of exponential growth is to get you to the exit in 3 to 5 years. See, what we actually don't realize with this whole Silicon Valley system is that there's actually something slightly more sinister that's actually going on here. What happens is you basically have you've basically got these startups, and they're being essentially treated like, I'm sure you guys are familiar with battery chickens, right? So you've basically got this chicken, and basically it's being force-fed, right? It's just like that with startups. Startups are basically getting force-fed with investment capital, so they can sort of grow artificially quickly and then look really plump and juicy and attractive. And then what happens is at the moment of the exit, the value is pulled out of the company again. And you're basically left with almost a carcass left over. Unfortunately, this is sort of how our startups are being treated. Now, a business model isn't usually even part of it. Because here's the thing, there's no way that you can hire that quickly, and there's no way that you can, grow that quickly without being very deeply in the red. But what's actually happening here is it's kind of like, the investors are basically pulling a kind of pump and dump scheme on the public markets. They're basically taking this inherently revenue losing, so very deeply in the red company that has no solid fundamentals at all, except for the ability to very quickly spend other people's money. They are hyping this up and making it look like this really great success. And then, basically what they're doing is they're dumping this onto the public markets with the hope that, it's called the greater fool theory, that there's always going to be a greater fool that is basically willing to pay for this, and here's the thing. The greater fool is basically buying this because they are hoping that that value is going to continue to go up, which works in a growth economy, right? It's the same thing that's happening also with Bitcoin. I mean, it's basically one huge speculative bubble that is not based on anything. There's no actual business fundamentals or actual genuine value that's underlying this. It's just that people are hoping that they're going to be able to find someone else afterwards who's willing to pay more. As long as the economy keeps going up, okay, that works. But the problem is you hit something like March 2020, suddenly the stock market drops. The problem is the last person that has bought it, basically, the last buyer is left holding the bag. Right? So basically, these people are going to then take losses because that revenue losing company pre-IPO is still revenue losing now. and that hasn't changed. Oftentimes we are told that our real success, like our real wild vision, let's knock it out of the park version of success is to become a unicorn. Right? And a unicorn, of course, is a company that's has a valuation of $1 billion or more. Now, here's the thing: 90% of unicorns are never cash flow positive. Never. I can basically send you links to articles that talk about this. There's actually a great article in American Affairs that talks about the problem of VC that goes into this. Also, the Institute for New Economic Thinking has a really great series on venture capital where they really go into the details. But what people don't realize is that the VC ecosystem itself doesn't even work. In other words, if you take a look at venture capital and the returns that they've been promising, they promise their own investors, their limited partners, 10x returns, 18x returns. They come with these really wild promises. But truthfully speaking, the VC ecosystem, basically 80% of VC investment funds have failed to even keep pace with the stock market. In other words, if you had just taken your money and put it into an index fund, you would have done better than 80% of the VC funds out there over the last 25 years. This should start to be, raising sort of red flags here about exactly what's happening. So basically what's happening is 90% of startups are failing. This is bad for the founders. The actual limited partners, are losing money, basically because most of these companies are actually bleeding money. The people who buy it on the stock market, they're also buying something that has unsound fundamentals. The real question is here, who's winning, right? I mean, like, who is this system really working for? The truth is, the only person that the system is working for is fund managers. And I can tell you why. So the typical venture capitalist, their own business model is basically they have what's called a 2% asset under management fee and a 20% carry. So the 20% carry is basically a performance incentivization. So basically when you exit the company, that they basically get 20% of that. Now this carry is what embeds the growth imperative into startups. If you remove this piece of the performance incentive, then basically that would be the growth, that whole this need to grow, that would be gone. 2% is also highly extractive. People think that 2% is a really low number. But it actually turns out that people don't understand how compounding works. If you think about a 2% mortgage and the amount that you would basically have to pay over 30 years, it's basically, if I, for example, had a retirement vehicle like a 401k or a Roth IRA or something like that, and I had a 2% management fee on that, then literally I would be giving 2/3 of the returns to my fund manager. That's what people actually don't realize. This 2% is mega extractive. Now, this too can be done differently. There's actually a very interesting investment fund that's called Snowball Impact Management, and they're located in the UK. And they've got what is basically a cost price fee structure. So the first thing is they completely got rid of the carry. So basically performance incentive, gone. And the second thing that they do is they operate basically on a cost price basis, which basically means that they, what they do is they only, their fees are only what they need to actually be able to pay people inside the fund middle class salaries with a pension. In other words, they are a not-for-profit investment fund in the same way that Radically Open Security is a not-for-profit security company. I don't know about you, but that gets me really excited. But the point here is that even when you talk about the social enterprise ecosystem, most of the impact investors are also using that same commercial fee structure of 2 and 20. That's creating the perverse incentivization. And that's why, when we wind up having problems with social enterprises, in other words, we're selling our B corporation to Unilever, or, our so-called impact company is being pushed towards exponential growth. This is the reason why. It's because of this incentive from the fee structure. And if you have impact VCs, I think we need to actually start asking them, if they say that they're all about impact and they're not about profit maximization, I would just say, put your money where your mouth is, adjust your fee structure. Because until they start adjusting their fee structure to be more not for profit, it's all greenwashing. It's all social washing, really. So you need to understand this also as a social impact project that, if the fee structure doesn't change, then basically the way you're going to get pushed by the VC, even if they're impact VCs, is also not going to change. Just quite simply because the incentive structure is different. This isn't to say that these are bad people. No one's bad here. There's a lot of people oftentimes who are well-meaning. But the thing is, though, we've got good people trapped in a bad system. And really, it's the system that we need to change. But we can't actually really change it until we understand the ways in which it's problematic. The other thing that people don't understand is with these money-losing unicorns, because once again, 90% of unicorns never make it into the black. If you ask the question, whose money are they losing? The answer gets even more appalling because what happens here is that in the United States, 60% of the contributions to venture capital funds are pension funds, which basically means these revenue-losing unicorns, they're spending our money. They're spending the money of taxpayers, normal citizens. So really everybody is losing in the system, except for the fund managers. But the problem though is these fund managers, this is the 1%. And the problem is those who have a lot of money, they tell the narrative. They control the narrative. They have the largest marketing budget. And this is why almost unanimously throughout the entire venture capital ecosystem, we basically have people saying, yes, you need investment to start out, and exits are the definition of success. You have very few alternative voices out there, quite simply also because in incubators oftentimes are created by the rich to maximize their own returns. This is the other thing we don't think about. There's a financial conflict of interest between most incubators and their teachings. The reason why is because they take equity in their own startups. So I can give you an example. There's a commercial incubator in Amsterdam, and there's also an academic incubator in Amsterdam. I work quite regularly with the academic incubator. The academic incubator basically is subsidy funded, so they don't have a financial conflict with their startups. It's kind of a pay it forward model. They, really like things like post-growth entrepreneurship, basically the kinds of nonprofit entrepreneurship that I'm teaching because, hey, new forms of social enterprise, cool. Right? But I went at one point to a commercial incubator and said, hey, I would love to give, a workshop to some of your startups. I won't charge a cent for it. I'm happy to do it for free. I just want to basically spread some new ideas about entrepreneurship. And this incubator thought about it. And they said, actually, our investors are investment banks like Merrill Lynch. To be honest, I don't think they're going to like your message. So I'm really sorry, but we have to politely decline. Stop and think about this. An incubator, does not want somebody, giving a talk for free about alternative, bootstrapping based business models because it threatens their own commercial existence. Not enough people are talking about this financial conflict of interest. It's the same thing also with business schools and the way they're pushing the same business model. Most of the large business schools have endowments, and that those endowments basically come from the 1%, from the people who don't want the status quo to change. Smaller universities have that problem far less because their business model is more like getting subsidies. And if they just look at stuff like new forms of nonprofit entrepreneurship and they think, oh, cool research. So in all cases, if you think about it, the incentive structure lines up, but it's just, it's a really typical case of follow the money. So I guess, but this leaves you now as the founder of an open source project saying, okay, right, but what do I do? Okay, now we're starting to understand why that VC system is so problematic. Now, the shortcut I think here is what you can do is create a service-based company, basically just starting by creating a minimum viable product and then basically just finding some kind of a service that you can provide as a platform. In other words, you can match producers with consumers. You're going to have basically some form of revenue going. You put some amount of margin on top of that revenue, and then you can use that to gradually build your platform. That's also how we did it with Radically Open Security. We basically sell security services, but by selling security services and then placing some margin on top of that, we were able to use that to basically crowdfund the production of our intellectual property. In other words, we also created a system that's called Pentext. It's a completely open source pen testing, reporting and documentation system. We open sourced it. We also made it an OWASP project. And the truth is, we crowdfunded the R&D on this entire system by from paying customers. And again, we get that compounding effect. The other thing also is there's no VC that can tell me that I can't keep it open as open source, quite simply because we did fund this by having paying customers. Now, this model is called cross-subsidization. So basically, you get some service offering, you use that to basically build up your flywheel, basically your engine that starts turning. And from that point outwards, you get this revenue stream that you can use to fund basically the other thing that you also want to be creating. I've also been using that revenue stream to start my own incubator. That's basically teaching what I call post-growth entrepreneurship. It's called Nonprofit Ventures. I should also mention that feel free to connect with me, please, on LinkedIn. I also just posted a call to applications for our 2022 incubator program for Nonprofit Ventures. So actually, if anybody's interested in applying, please do. But basically, another thing is, again, choose your activism. Pick your project basically that you want to cross-subsidize. The other thing is NGI Tetra is being kind enough to also offer mentoring slots for all of you that are attending this workshop today. I hope that I at least sort of piqued your interest in sort of understanding why going the traditional VC route might not work for your project. I mean, you don't want to be pushed into freemium models. You don't want to be pushed into closing off parts of your open source again. You don't need that kind of pressure. So if you want to know more about post-growth entrepreneurship and the actual nuts and bolts of how it works, then feel free to just get one of these mentoring slots. I'm happy to basically spend an hour with you. And also, I do more mentoring for NGI Tetra, which also NGI Tetra pays for. But also, I am running my own incubator program with Nonprofit Ventures. And that's also, by the way, free of charge. That's not my business model. I do this because I'm trying to help people and make the world better. So anyway, I hope, I think I'm out of time, so I'm basically going to wrap it up here. But I hope that you all found this thought-provoking. And yeah, thanks for listening. And is there any time for questions, Greta?
Yeah, we have about 5 to 10 minutes definitely for questions. So I saw one which was a bit way back, which was asking about whether your business was also set up with steward ownership.
Yes, awesome question. Yes, so Radically Open Security is also set up as a kind of steward-owned construction. Steward ownership is amazing. So anyone who is trying to start a non-commercial business, I would really highly recommend that you check it out. It's started by something called the Purpose Foundation, which is based out of Germany. And what steward ownership is it's creating a company that's impossible to sell. Of course, this is the part where most of the VCs are going to run away in horror because, what's the point of having a company if you can't sell it, right? But what this is doing is protecting the vision and the direction of your company in the long term. What we're actually trying to do here is we're trying to put belts and braces onto the company to protect the entrepreneur from themselves. See, here's the thing. I'm saying I'm never going to sell Radically Open Security, but you never know. I mean, somebody might come tomorrow and say, hey, here's 50 million. Are you sure? And the point is, we need legal mechanisms in place to make sure that, because everyone has their price, right? So the only way to really protect us from ourselves, given that we all have a price, is to build in legal belts and braces to make sure that we cannot sell the company. There's two main ways of doing this. One is with something called a golden share model. So the way that it works typically with steward ownership is you have one share which basically has veto rights that can prevent you from being able to exit the company, and then you give that share to the Purpose Foundation. Again, that's sort of effectively making sure that it's impossible to sell the company. There are other alternate ways of doing it. You can also have boards. This is also a way that I'm experimenting with right now with both Radically Open Security and Nonprofit Ventures, basically having a post-growth board of people who basically also guard the mission of the company. So basically, you would need to get all of the board members to agree to be able to sell the company. That also, if you have enough board members and you're making sure you're stocking them from a independent third party, I'm also going to be trying to start some kind of post-growth foundation additionally that can sort of stock and supply board members. That's also another way of trying to make it, in other words, a lot harder to be able to sell your company. Although, to be honest, I think steward ownership really has the best model for that right now with the golden share. So really great question. And but again, the thing is, when you also become steward owned, you're basically ensuring that you're completely uninteresting for VCs. So be aware of that. I'm totally cool with it because I usually tell people to avoid the VCs, but when you choose that direction, then yeah, that's also a consequence. So, are there any other questions?
Great, thanks. So Mirko has a question like if there's a resource or website collecting examples of such EU companies, and I'm not entirely sure which type you mean, Mirko. Do you mean the one that Melanie was just discussing?
Yeah, so there's lots of websites where you can find more information about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, nonprofit or steward, that's what he means, yeah.
Yeah. If you want to know more about steward ownership, I would highly recommend that you go to the Purpose Foundation website. They've got a really awesome little booklet that basically covers steward-owned businesses and the history of them, and they've also got a list of companies that are currently steward-owned. Also, with my own sort of ideas with post-growth entrepreneurship, you can also go to postgrowthentrepreneurship.com, and there's actually quite a bit of videos, basically all the materials that I'm preparing. I'm basically giving a Creative Commons license and putting online for free. So you can also feel free to go there. Oh, and another thing is please read Building Social Business by Muhammad Yunus. It's really super inspirational. And his entire Grameen family of companies is also very inspiring.
All right, thanks. I think those were the main questions that we had for now. I mean, Melanie, are you staying with us for a short while more? If there are more questions, maybe we can ask them later as well. Or
sure. I'll hang out for now, and I also look forward to hearing Bunnie's story. So.
Yeah. All right, great. So this is but actually it's a great opportunity for me to say a few words about the mentoring. So I'll just show one slide as well. As Melanie mentioned, then we will also be providing one-on-one mentoring with her. So we have 10 slots available with her. And the main requirement we have is that if you register for this mentoring, that you need to be funded by NGI. And I will post the link where you can go and register for this in the chat, and I'll also leave it in the shared notes as well. So that's how you can access that. But Melanie, thank you so much for your time and for this talk. And then we move on to Bunnie, a hacker and researcher, and he will be talking to you more about then crowdfunding and how he has gone about it. What are some of the key success factors and so forth. So I'll hand it over to you and stop sharing my screen so you can show your slides.
Sure. Where do I select my slides? Will someone bring it up for me?
Just a second, I'll make you presenter once more. So.
Okay.
And when you're a presenter, you can use that plus button at the bottom and just click through to your slides.
There it is. Great. I think, can everyone see the slide, the first slide there?
Yes, that works. I'll turn off my video as well so everyone can focus on your presentation.
Great, sure. So yeah, hopefully you can also see me over here a little bit because I will have maybe some visual aids on this side. I was asked to talk a little bit about my adventure in crowdfunding. Very briefly, just to get started, like what is it that we're actually going to talk about? I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on it, but it's a little device. It looks a bit like this. This is an actual sort of production sample. We are ramping up for production very shortly, so you can get an idea of what it looks like. It's an open hardware device for trustable communications, designed for secure text messaging, voice chat. Comes with multilingual capabilities for things like password management or crypto wallet, whatever you want to do. It doesn't do things like web browsing or games or photos and videos. It's meant to be a minimal attack surface device that you can trust. So the nuts and bolts of it are shown here. This gives you an idea of sort of what's involved in building the product. There's a lot of different parts, cases, circuit boards, keyboards, displays, bezels, and whatnot. And then, you know, a little more, you know, this gives you an idea of the complexity of the circuit board itself, which is kind of leading up to why we have to crowdfund. There's a lot of things that go into the product that cost quite a bit of money that we can't simply, you know, go to a place like NLNet and say, hey, give us money to build these things for people. We have to find money to actually fund the production of these things ourselves. And in addition to that, there's a whole lot of code that is a bit out of scope from the presentation, but there's a lot of more effort that goes in the project than just building a piece of hardware and delivering people shiny bricks. So why do we need fundraising in the first place? It's because building hardware costs money. Atoms are more expensive than bits, and also atoms are cheaper by the dozen. So it's cheaper to buy 100 widgets once than one widget 100 times over. There's a transaction cost for every single thing. And so ideally we can aggregate the total amount of demand and build them in one lump as opposed to building them one by one. And just to give you an idea of like sort of the challenges we're up against, this is the part shown here is our FPGA, which is the core of our device. There's $67 in unit quantities. So, you know, if you want to build 1,000 of them, that's $67,000 in cash. It's not a small amount of money. And you can see the zero in stock right now. So there's also the problem of actually just trying to secure the stuff. You have to pay cash up front to suppliers today because of the difficulties of supply chain, whatnot. So we have to come up with a way to, you know, create the scratch that we need to build these devices. So for completeness, I just want to sort of go over some of the sort of the financing options. Previously, Melanie had actually touched on quite a bit of this, but for completeness, I'll just sort of put this slide here. One thing that a lot of people don't talk about, which I think actually what some people really wish to have, is licensing. It's a thing where you actually just give up full control of your idea to someone else. You sell it to someone else. It's really hard to secure licensing a deal, but depending upon your outlook on life, it's either a lot of money or very little money. Because in a way, if you license something, you get a royalty, and then you just get money from that point forward doing nothing, right? So there's no cost of goods at the point in time for you. You just get paid for having done an idea. And actually, a lot of people build successful personal businesses off of doing licensing. On the other hand, people say it's not much money because royalties tend to be quite small. And so it's one option to think about. It may be viable for some open source projects, but you lose a lot of control in doing it. Another option is venture capital. You give up a lot of control of your company to a bunch of VCs. Basically, you don't really have control of your idea anymore. Depending upon your level of connections and how your experience level, it can be very hard or very easy to secure, but generally it's not easy to secure, but you get a ton of money. And so if you want a lot of money, that's one direction to go, but it comes with a lot of the problems as mentioned in the previous talk. Another method is bank credit, so you can get loans. So I could go into a bank and try to get a loan to secure the production of these devices. It's very hard to get a loan these days right now, particularly in this financial climate. You do retain basically mission control, but also the amount of money you get is just as much as the parts after the diligence and the bank is going. So you don't really get money for growth, and you don't really, it's kind of a sort of a dumb money way to get cash. But it's an option that should always be on the table for people to remember, particularly if you want some non-dilutive financing that gives you control of your business. Another way is you can just use your own cash. If you have friends and family, or if you happen to have your own money, why are you even here talking to me, listening to this, right? You can just take your own money and build your own thing. You get total control of your idea. It's super easy to secure because your own money. You may not get as much money, or if you have enough money, then you don't care. But actually, to some extent, total retention of control is a problem in itself. We'll get into that in the next slide. And the other sort of last item on here is sort of future users, right? So people who would be users of your project, but you don't have it today and you want to sort of get money from those future users, you give up some control because the users now, you have an obligation to the users to give the promise. So even if you have to pivot later on, you have that obligation, you have a social obligation to the user. They don't have share control of your company, but you have a sort of a, moral obligation almost, sort of deliver something. Some people take it seriously, some people don't. It's not as hard to secure, in my opinion, as VC. Some people actually find it very difficult to do crowdfunding campaigns because you have to sort of promote yourself and do the whole dog and pony show. But I have some comfort level with that, so I don't think it's too hard. But it depends on your opinion. And the amount of money you get is enough. It's not a fabulous amount. You're not going to be able to, hire tons of people and sit on errand chairs and hire a personal chef or anything like this. But it's enough for you to build your project, right? I typically tend to go for crowdfunding, and the reason why I like to do that is that the number one reason is I engage with future users. I kind of put it in bold here. I want to say it very clearly. It's validation of the project idea. If your idea stinks, people aren't going to put money into it, and you want to know that early, right? And it's okay to fail. Actually, you shouldn't be afraid to put the idea out there and then pull it down, fix it, and then put it up again. Crowdfunding platforms allow you to do that. There's no penalty other than your pride. So very early on, you can say, hey, will people actually put money into this thing? Will they actually put some blood, sweat, and tears into it with me to build a shared narrative of this project? And if you can do that, that means you have validated your idea very early on. It's good. You also can use it to bootstrap your user base. You can find your key users. You can use them to you can actually tap them early on during the final stage of your project development to amplify the product, to actually get their best ideas, to bake them in early on, as opposed to shipping the project and be like, oh crap, like I wish I knew about these 3 things before I built my project, right? The downside of it is that, or maybe you can say downside, good side, you get enough money to produce the product, but you don't get like enough money to become fabulously wealthy and retire. If you're being honest about your project, there are some people who almost make it a business model to over-raise on crowdfunding projects and not deliver. And then certain platforms allow you to do that and they get quite wealthy, but that's not the type of fundraising I'm talking about here. And it's not necessarily quite enough to do what I would call big R&D. So you can't go ahead and say, I need $100 million to build a fab or something like that. You're not going to get that money through crowdfunding, right? You can get enough money to build these things and deliver them to people with a bit of margin. The hardest part about sort of doing, getting into the crowdfunding point is sort of pricing your product, right? And so I was asked a little bit to talk about this notion here. There's a line I put in the middle here, which is sort of like the cost to produce. So basically, if I were to raise this amount of money, I would, the day after I've delivered everything, not be ahead, not be behind. But then on top of that, you also have to consider other costs that are not core to the product, things like, sort of production yield. What happens if not all of them work when they come off the line? What about distribution and sales overhead? What about logistics? Oh, accounting and compliance. Now that I actually have some money, I have to go to file forms and stuff that cost money. Things don't work. I have returns and exchange to deal with. I have to do customer service. I have to pay taxes. I have to buy myself food. I need a living wage, right? So these things sort of tend to push the price up. And then things that tend to push the price down are maybe someone has a similar but cheaper product out there. Maybe if you go cheaper, you can get a volume discount. Maybe you want to just get market share, right? And so sometimes one of the big mistakes people make when picking fundraising is they underprice it because they bargain with themselves and they say, if I actually just sell it for $99, I'll get 1 million people buying this thing, but it actually cost me $200 to make it. And so this is a very typical failure mode of crowdfunding projects is that, of course, if you say, I'm going to sell you $1 for 50 cents, everyone's going to give you 50 cents because you expect $1 back, right? That's kind of the deal some of these crowdfunding projects get into. And of course, when they try to deliver it, they can't deliver that many dollars because they only got 50 cents, right? So you have to make sure you don't underprice, which means that the pricing of your product may look a little unattractive that they have. And I get a lot of criticism from people that my crowdfunded projects tend to be on the high end of pricing. But I'm sure I can deliver it, and I'm sure that I can continue to operate and exist after that point. And usually I get enough people who believe in it that they're willing to pay that price. And you have to be realistic about the market demand. You can't be like, oh, a typical another failure mode would say, how many phones get sold? Oh, there's 1 billion phones get sold. If I got just 1% of 1% of that, that'll be like 100,000 phones, right? So we should still sell 100 because they're doing some division off the top end. It doesn't work like that, right? If you try to do the top-down market analysis, you can't really estimate your market demand. You have to kind of go from the bottom. How many people are going to reach in your campaign? How many people will purchase? How many people realistically have the skill set to use your project? And then you can sort of arrive at a number you can do. So pricing in practice. So this is the actual campaign that we ran. The snapshot of the campaign as it closed. We raised 375,000 USD of a $220,000 goal. We always have a tier called Buy Us a Beer, which is $10, and it's just pure profit. So people who don't want to give anything to us, but they just want to donate to the cause, that's actually where honestly most of our ongoing funds come from, because you don't have to deliver anything for that, but it's just it's literally we can buy beer with it. And I'm glad that we have that badge there. And then we price our product. So the baseline product was $512, just a nice round number for a programmer. And then we had some other projects. We had a limited edition, we had an early birds, and we had some early bird limited edition. So what we did is we sort of guesstimated we might sell about 500 units. We actually did 840 at the end of the day. And we set a no-go at 400 units. So that was the $220,000 lower floor. If we had to produce less than that number of units, we would not economically be viable. We would actually be underwater, and so the campaign would cancel at that point in time. And basically, this equates to about twice the variable cost. So in other words, twice, if you just did the BOM cost, the cost to produce, we multiplied that by 2, and that arrived at this number, right? So we actually, theoretically, if we were just to go to the whatever the this particular bar was cost to produce, we would price it at half, right? But we didn't, because we have to deal with all the things like distribution, yield, compliance. All the compliance is actually very expensive, because you also have to get FCC certificates and all sorts of stuff. That all has to come out of the initial crowdfunding bit. And so if you're to compare this to actual typical electronics, if you're like a Sony and you're making a Walkman or something like that, you actually would price it 3 to 4x over your costs. So if Sony bought something for $20, they would sell it on the shelf for $99. That would be the typical sort of thing. So we're actually a bit low on the cost side, but because our volume is so low, we can't actually use that pricing formula. We created special edition SKUs, which also helps create margin for future R&D. Which is good for us, and we picked them specifically to basically just be a case mod. It's very visibly better. Like you can just look at it and say this is a better product, but it gives us a good margin. So one mistake people do is they create special editions. They're actually really hard to produce, and they actually lose money making the special edition units. That's not the idea. The idea of a special edition is almost like here's a sticker, here's a color, whatever it is, some small delta that your sort of Uber fans can use to have a badge, almost to say that like I back this, I believe in it, I put more money into it. And then we have an early bird rate. So there's people who can't afford your units as much, but they're sort of your big followers, and you offer them if they move quick, they can actually get a discount on the units, and that helps drum up the sort of momentum you need to get the campaign going. And so we have a limited number of those units that are put out there. And so that's how we sort of do price differentiation across the market to try and make sure we raise enough money, and then also sort of try to address the fact that there are people who are less able to afford our units. So then if you decide to go crowdfunding, there's a bunch of platforms. There's things like Kickstarter, Indiegogo, Crowd Supply, or you can do it yourself, right? These are sort of some of the bigger platforms that I'm more familiar with. I think there might be a whole bunch of new ones coming up lately, but it's been a while since I had to research them in detail. I put together this very briefly. So one thing I want to say before we go on the slide, conflict of interest statement. I used to be an advisor and a minor shareholder in Crowd Supply. I currently don't hold any shares. I'm no longer an advisor, but keep that in mind if you think it sounds a bit like a pitch. It's because I know a lot about their business model. And so Kickstarter will take about 5% fee and a 3% credit card processing fee on top of that. So it's 8% total. As far as I know, they don't give much project review and support. So if you want to go ahead and raise something that costs you $100, but you're charging $50, they'll let you go ahead and shoot yourself in the foot like that. And this is a famous cause of many failed Kickstarters. They don't do any post fulfillment distribution. Once the site's when the campaign's done, you can't order again. The day the campaign ends, it ends. And then also the user community actually for Kickstarter goes very large in terms of volume. They have a huge mailing base, and if you gain the favor of the staff. They will promote your thing, and you can actually get very, very big numbers. And they want to do that because they get their fee on top of it. On the other hand, it's a very diffuse community, and they're not very. I wouldn't say they're not the smart money out there, right? So it's very easy to get backers who don't understand what your project is and are upset later on. Crowd Supply takes a higher fee, 10%, plus they take a credit card charge. But they do offer project review and support. So when you apply, they'll be like, do we actually think you can sell your project build your project for the amount you're selling? If it doesn't meet that test, they'll push back on you, right? They actually give you a sanity check to make sure you're successful. They have a very high rate of project delivery. Generally, not necessarily on time because things always go wrong, but they generally do have 100% actual delivery rate of projects because of that review process they do, and it helps the creators. It makes it less agonizing for you because you're not just flapping in the wind. You don't know what's going to go on. You don't have an experience doing it. These guys will look at you. They've done hundreds of campaigns. They know where you are, what your bin is, how much you're going to raise, what your market thing is. So they'll sort of do a quick look at that and make sure that that's all you're checking out. And then also, very importantly, after you do your project, they will also support you with post campaign distribution and sales. So your campaign page turns into a sales site afterwards. You can take pre-orders after the campaign closes, and then beyond that, essentially, if you create a little extra in your campaign, you can essentially keep selling. So there's an ongoing revenue feed for this, which is actually, I find to be very helpful, because setting up a sales site myself, which you'd have to do if you did Kickstarter or Indiegogo, is actually a bit of a pain in the butt. You have to deal with your own 3PL, you have to deal with your own credit card processing agent. I don't have to do any of that. I basically just do what I do, make more of the thing that I make, and then these guys do what they do and they sell it. And they take a margin on top of it. It's a bigger margin than the crowdfunding fee, closer to a retail margin, but I'm still making revenue with a lot of extra effort on my side. The user community for them tends to be very open source, so it's smaller in terms of numbers, but it's smarter in terms of a match of what you're trying to do. A final option is you can DIY. I know people who do this. People are like, look, I just put Stripe on my site. I'm good at JavaScript. I do back end, whatever it is, front end, and there's no fee taken. You do everything yourself, and you have total control over it. You can do your own landing site, whatever it is. Some people have had good success with it. Some people have not. But that's also an option. I don't want to say you have to go with one of these providers. You can always do it yourself. And then I already kind of went through some of the value-added services that Crowd Supply did for Precursor, but specifically for us in this campaign, they did the script for a video, they did the video editing, they copy edited our campaign page, they reviewed our bill of materials and our manufacturing plan. They actually connected us with some distributors to try and offer better pricing. It wasn't a good enough deal to make me move, but I have my own deals I went with. We're going to be listed on Mouser. Mouser is a big distributor, international distributor. They're helping with international and export compliance to various parts of the world. Of course, they'll do distribution and shipping. They actually also, because they believed in the project, they took some of their own money and backed it in the campaign. So they actually sort of said, we think there's going to be, we believe in this, so we're actually going to be a backer ourselves. And they actually bought some units for their stocking, which is really nice. I like that they have a GitHub-based user interface issue, so I'm very familiar with it. So basically, when you sign up, you get this issues in a GitHub repo. You check in your assets, they pull it, you track issues. I'm very familiar as a developer. I like that versus some of the other more bespoke workflows. The downside for people in the EU is that the warehouse is in USA, so there's a friction in getting to the EU, but their shipping rate's pretty good overall. So. In terms of, I was asked to talk a little bit about setting up the campaign. Looks like I'm not running over time yet. So I had to buy some media assets. I bought their domain name. That's the first thing you do, right? Precursor.dev. You can go there and it'll land you on our website. We made a crowdfunding video, took a whole bunch of static photos. And before the campaign even launched, we wrote 3 to 4 updates, about 2,000 words of text on various pieces describing the project. We built a landing page. We sort of drummed up some PR context. So before we even got to the campaign, we essentially made sure we're prepared. Because what happens is once you hit the button in the campaign, it's a wild ride. Like you are just in pure reaction mode at that point in time because there's so much, there's a huge maelstrom of activity. So you want to make sure you have a deep bucket of media and responses that you can pull from, so you're not overwhelmed trying to keep up with the current of press that goes along. Unfortunately, this graph came out a little bit fine, and I should use a larger line font, but I'll talk you through it. So when you execute a campaign, most of the money actually is raised in the first 2 and last 2 days of the campaign. So our campaign, basically in the first 2 days, there's a line that goes up here. We got a bit past the 50% threshold in 48 hours, right? And there's a general rule that if you get past 40% in the first 48 hours, you're very likely to be successful. And then what happens is that there's like this 3 to 4 week agonizing period where no one buys anything. But during this period here, you're engaging with users, you're doing Ask Me Anythings, you're trying to figure out what the message is and what it takes to sort of hit that last group of users, to really get your user base together. And you're also sort of talking to your early backers, you know who they are, and you're engaging with them, and actually they're building up momentum with you. And so on the very early end, we had the early bird pricing, got those people in, you know, sort of piled on, and we got our posse together. And then and the very final push, you sort of try to build up a little bit of FOMO, a little fear of missing out. Like, you know, certain campaign features are unavailable after that point, like the limited editions, limited edition. You can't get that nice case after the campaign. Sorry, nothing you can do. You have to back during the campaign. The pricing goes up slightly after the campaign, so it went from $512 up to $560 or something like this, right? A couple of other things happen. So you give people reasons to buy if they're on the fence, and then you also sort of address the issues that people had, the hems and haws during the campaign, and you close it out, and then you hopefully get past 100% in the last couple of days. So one thing about our campaign, so campaigning in 4 days, get 90% of it, yeah. Except you have to have that like bit of time in the middle, that sort of tension, right? You can't have like a blockbuster movie that's just the opening scene, you know, with the excitement, and the closing scene with excitement, and no character development in the middle. People don't. You know, part of crowdfunding is actually it's a performance art in a way, right? And so anyways, our campaign was a bit of an anomaly because we actually did a soft launch. We launched in the middle of the COVID pandemic. So September 10th, 2020, if you remember, there was a tense U.S. presidential election going down, which was taking all the media cycles. You couldn't get a message out edgewise between Trump's tweets. Global lockdowns and travel restrictions everywhere. No conferences, no meetings, nothing face-to-face. Everyone was locked up at home. There was no message of vaccine availability at this point in time, right? So it was probably the worst time ever to launch a campaign. However, we felt that because, you know, we have a product, it's ready to go. We had developed it. Everything was there. If we waited another full year, it doesn't get any better. We just had to do it, right? It's do or die. So we did something you normally don't do, which is we did a soft launch. About a month and a half ahead of time, we tipped our cards and said, we're thinking about doing this. Is anyone interested? And we sort of looked at the analytics for it, right? The reason why you don't want to do this is that the top ranked media outlets only cover you once. And so we actually blew a lot of our coverage with the pre-launch, and a lot of places didn't touch us during the campaign. So we actually probably raised less than we could have because of the tip, but we also kind of knew that we could actually do it, right? If the pre-launch was actually really flat and there's no interest, we would have put it off for another year and tried again. So I think it was worth the risk of doing the pre-launch. We started the orders on November 1st and closed on December 15th, and as you can see, we did clear our goal. And so, you know, early in the campaign, we got to 50% our goal in 24 hours. I had a media schedule of 1 post per week. And the way I structured it, the way I made it palatable to myself, is I actually disguised documentation as PR coverage. So I had to write anyways things about like, what's on the board? How did we make it? What's inside the box, right? These are things that you have to answer. This is solid documentation you need for a product, right? So I then just basically wrote documentation, put a paragraph in the front about the campaign, put a paragraph in the end reminding the buy, and then you had documentation, and that was PR coverage. It's actually very, for me as a technical person, something I could write. I didn't feel too salesy about it. It felt authentic, and then for the consumers, they actually got meaningful, you know, information out of it. It wasn't like just a puff piece. And then we did a bunch of Twitter and blog coverage to try and do it. So that was the first sort of 24 hours. We did this blitz of documentation as PR. There's some examples of some of the things I wrote up. Like I wrote about, like I did cross sections of the motherboard. Here's the construction, how it is. Here's it, you know, here's how motherboards get built. So we did a big piece on that. We talked about sort of like the actual architecture of the SoC and the things on the inside one by one going through all the blocks. So it was actually, you know, depending on what tickled your interest, you're more of a hardware guy or you're more of a software guy or you're more of this. We had a little bit of a buffet of things that you could sort of whet your appetite for what's this going to be, right? And it's all documentation at the end of the day. Mid-campaign numbers barely move for 3 to 4 weeks, right? We did Ask Me Anything sort of in the mid-campaign, and it was an opportunity to answer people's questions, and more importantly, an opportunity to listen to my audience, right? Sort of like I had to recalibrate my messaging, figure out what we were going to do. So this is an example. Where was it? Do I have an example of the thing? No, I didn't have an example. All right. I thought I had an example of the Ask Me Anything. But anyways, so the idea is that during that period of time, we had actually sort of a little more media assets than we needed, and we sort of targeted it down, sort of figured out what people wanted, what were the pain points of the project. And then we came up with a stretch goal that gave it, in our case, is a bigger battery. They gave it a little longer battery life. People wanted that. And so, and actually it's correlated with more sales. We actually got to a certain number. I could afford the minimum order quantity. It was like 3,000 minimum for a full custom battery versus buying an off-the-shelf one, which is a little smaller than the battery compartment itself. So we actually, it was actually a true synergy of stretch goal plus, the campaign. It also gives more reasons for my existing backers, because they're like, ooh, I can now get even bigger battery than I thought I was. So these guys are now telling their friends, you got to back it because I want the bigger battery, right? And so those guys are now out there helping me get the word out. And then at the very end, there's the post-campaign price hike, and the limited availability drives the FOMO. And so we went from $220,000 to $350,000 in the last 40 hours, just got across the line. So that was very nice. And that actually, I've done a few crowdfunding campaigns. They all tend to have a curve like this. I've crowdfunded books, I've crowdfunded other things. Actually, when I was listening to Melanie's talk, I really wanted to interject and say, I actually have also done a full crowdfund bootstrap company with no growth model in mind, just pure sustainability. Want to build something. It was a technology company for getting women involved in technology. It's an interesting case study. You can do it. It's very sustainable to have these types of things to do. It's totally not Silicon Valley though. Anyways, so the key success and factor takeaways from this is that, number one, you need to have a clear positioning of your project, right? What are you trying to solve? What are you doing? Why do people care about it? So I had like these little diagrams I sort of prepared to sort of like outline the space and say, okay, Precursor sits at the intersection of like, three things about pocketability, hackability, and evidence-based trust, right? So there's some people it resonated with. Some people don't care about trust. Okay, fine. Buy yourself an iPhone. I don't care, right? Some people don't care about pocketability. Okay, go with a Raspberry Pi or a Snickerdoodle, right? Some people really care about all three, in which case you want this particular project, right? We tried to keep our pricing realistic, so we had this sort of comparison chart we prepared to try and convince people that our high price was probably worth it. And then let's see, we had a really big bucket of media prepared before the campaign. So this image here, which I showed again, is just one of many. We had probably 50, 60, Photoshop cleaned up images ready to go. If someone had a question, I could throw it in there. It was really convenient because you get media inquiries like, here's a picture of the keyboard, here's a picture of the display, here's the inspection, right? These types of things. We had all these things ready to go. We had thumbnails and shorts, teardowns, block diagrams, demos, development guides. All this was done before the campaign started, so that during the campaign we were in pure reaction mode and answering questions. It made us sound smart when actually all we were was prepared. We're not that smart. We're just well prepared. Okay, this is the image here about engaging with the backers. This is actually a screenshot from the AMA, and so people here are asking about things like can I update my thing after I pop my device? What happens if you guys don't meet your funding goal, right? Oh, you guys wrote in Rust. Why didn't you use something else or whatever it is? Like, we got to engage with our backers, talked about things, and really, actually, more importantly, the valuable part of the 3 to 4 weeks, instead of someone joked about doing it in 4 days, during the 3 to 4 weeks, what you're raising is users and validation, right? You're actually reasoning with the user community, you're engaging with them. That's, in the long term, that's more valuable than the money, right? These people eventually turn into developers who contribute pull requests, right? And I actually, the thing that's most valuable to me in all of it is the cash is like great to build stuff. I want pull requests. I want people forking it. I want people using it, right? And this is where you start to get those people engaged and excited about it. So that's actually the most important part about 3 to 4 weeks. And so finally, probably the most important takeaway I would say is be genuine, right? So some people feel very nervous when they get out and do the crowdfunding campaign. They want to sort of sell it for bigger than it is. Like, I'm realistic. This thing is not going to run a web browser, right? Okay. It's not going to play video games. It's not going to do these things. Like, there's a lot of no. I was getting a lot of people no answers when I could have taken their money. I could have just said, well, maybe, if you did there's a lot of gray zone. I could have said, well, if you just ported this, you could do that. Or if you put a lot of effort, you could do this. And I could try to fool people into buying things, right? But the problem is that I would rather have not taking their money and then not have to deal with the customer support issue later on, because they're going to come back to me and haunt me, all the lies I told during the campaign. If I'm taking their money and I'm going to ship them something, I know that I'm signing up to support these people. So I'm sort of like also saying no to the dumb money and picking my customers as well at the same time. So being genuine helps me engage with those people, build a quality user base, get real money behind it, and these people hopefully then amplify the project and build the whole project up later on. So you got to be genuine. Self-promotion is really uncomfortable for people like me. I'm more comfortable in front of my keyboard and mouse, engineering things, making stuff, doing commit requests, whatever it is. That's like my, sort of like happy spot, right? Getting out there in front of the public is not comfortable for me. Actually, if you look at my Twitter feed, you'll notice that like I rarely tweet, but during the campaign, I was like all over the place, just like banging on the keyboard like a monkey, right? And that was actually like I had to sort of coach myself and pump myself to be able to do that. It's fun, but with a lot of preparation, it's okay. And the key thing was, to be genuine, sort of focus on the things that you love about the project, and people feel that enthusiasm. People want to back that genuine need, right? And so I just let people know how much I love what I do, and generally that's worked out for me. At the end of the day, people know that I'm going to deliver, and they have faith in my ability to be able to do it because I'm being true about it. And so this here, I'm just use my ending slide. This actually is an example of the slide that I used. I managed to book a couple of conferences. They're all virtual, of course, at the time. Normally during a crowdfunding campaign, I would actually bookend it with like real in-person conferences, and those are really powerful. Like I did a crowdfunding campaign for Novena, which was a laptop that I made for myself, and we bookended that actually at Maker Faire in the Bay Area, and someone put me up to actually cutting I have a ponytail. They put me up to cutting my hair if we got past a certain amount, and then people were literally at the bar buying $2,000 laptops just because they wanted to see me cut my hair. There's some momentum you get from the in-person shenanigans that happen. I got none of that benefit. I had to do it all online because of the pandemic, but we still managed to close. We would just take questions and leave this sort of slide up here where you can go. We would thank NLNet and NGI0 for graciously funding the R&D for this. And so this, sort of in the broader sense of things, what NLNet and NGI did is they allowed me to actually like produce the first sample of this, right? To know that I can build this, right? The R&D was done, the hard R&D was done. It took a couple years to do it. It was fine. I didn't have to crowdfund money to do that sort of thing. But then the important bit is that then I have to turn around and get the actual cash to produce enough units to start building a user base, to start the bootstrapping process. And so we did that with crowdfunding. And so current status is I'm about to start production in November. Hopefully the supply chain has been difficult. As many of you are aware, it's hard to get components. Prices have changed on me, whatever it is. Thank God I charged a little more than I thought it would be. I'm able to absorb most of those price increases without going broke. And we're hoping to meet our rough goal of first units out in January, the latest sort of by March or something like that. So we're on track to getting things delivered. And so far it's been a good story. There's more to be written. We'll see what happens in the ongoing, but I sincerely hope this turns into a sustainable model that people buy units, we get real applications developed for it. It finds stickiness in some user communities, either for authentication or crypto wallets, whatever people want to use for it. I'm very broad-minded about what people want to use it for, and then ongoing sales will help finance ongoing R&D and maintenance of the company itself, and we have a nice sustainable sort of business at the end of the day. Something that we're not shooting for the moon. We're not going to go exponential. We're not looking for an exit. Our exit is the community at the end of the day. And so I think that's about it for the time. You can take questions.
All right, thanks a lot. So there was one question from Emergent Kenshi in the middle here, asking about crowdfunding for hardware, gadgets, as opposed to maybe software, or even like ideas like Melanie's incubator, that the latter would be more difficult to fund through crowdfunding. And your thoughts on this?
So basically what the question is what's the thought about crowdfunding something without a tangible like product in exchange for the money? There's a number of, you have more options in that case. You can absolutely do crowdfunding for non-tangible good, because people are comfortable now with the idea that software should cost money. People pay for it. There are things you can do like early access to your software. You can crowdfund tiers of, so for your biggest backers, people who really have a need for your thing, and say, you can almost get like a sort of sell at a very high price, sort of like feature request access, right? So an access pass to you. What you're selling is your skill, essentially, in the run up to a certain time. What some people have done, and very successfully, is they will actually sort of live stream the development, and they'll do like a Patreon behind it. So they have some subscribers who give them like a couple bucks a month, $5, $10 a month, whatever it is, and then they can actually get into the feed and do an AMA, essentially, like, you know, once every week or once every month or something like that. You have an engagement with people who are putting money, just a few bucks a month, to help keep your software going. Like, that's not a realistic thing I think I can do for hardware. It's you know, I don't think, but you know, I think I've seen a bunch of software projects actually take advantage of sort of these models. And then, because software itself, you can do like with hardware, I don't want to sell patches. That's terrible, right? You know, oh, here, I didn't make your unit right. You're gonna have to solder something, and no one wants that. But everyone loves a new feature in software because you just like update and then run, right? So another thing is, you know, with software, you have a built-in ongoing sustainability model, right? You can have, like, you know, you can post, you know, rewards for bounties on bugs, like, you know, sort of say, this is the most important issue, I want to pay X amount of dollars for it. These are things you can do on the software side that you can't do on the hardware side. So actually, I think it's an even better story for the software guys. For hardware, we're stuck in the rock and the hard place of I actually have to deliver you something that works, that doesn't break, right, later on, and I have to not go broke doing it, right? That's actually the, you know, balancing the needle on its head.
All right, great, thanks. Siltar has asked, what about a false end of campaign, like with a surprise extended part? What do you think about that?
It's been done. The actual platform itself tends to discourage that, right? Because the platform's reputation is based upon the backers trusting that that everything's up there, right? So if actually went to Crowd Supply or Kickstarter and says, hey, I want to do a false end campaign, then extend it again, they're going to actually push back very hard. There has to be a good reason to do it. There are campaigns that do get extended either because they didn't meet the goal, and the extension will be typically not just we added more time, but it'll be we've made a significant revision to the project and it's a stretch goal type of thing, right? So here's a good reason why this is not what you saw before, and we think it's going to actually have a chance to conclude well. If you raise a certain amount of money and you hit your goal, it's very hard to convince that I want to be greedy and just make some more money. That doesn't happen. On the other hand, with Crowd Supply, because of the structure of them, at a certain time of the day, what happens is automatically the little purchase window on the side goes from all the early bird and the pre-campaign models, limited edition stuff. Those all disappear. It collapses into a single SKU that you make available for pre-order. So people who missed out, who were too late, or they woke up too late that day, they still have a chance to back you. You can still raise money afterwards. They're just buying the regular production unit. They're in line behind everyone else for delivery. And so in a way, you still have that, you know, sort of, you could call it an infinite extension to your funding in the form of pre-orders. That's unique to Crowd Supply. I think Kickstarter and Indiegogo don't offer that as an option.
All right, thank you. There was like a small comment, / maybe you can also comment on this, that like in order to run a successful crowdfunding campaign, you need to do a lot of work and preparation. And in order to do that, you need some funding to be able to do that. So any thoughts on how to sort of mediate that?
Right. I mean, so, I mean, at the end of the day, and I mentioned this before, you know, NLNet and NGI0 were instrumental in getting us, you know, sort of solving that chicken and egg problem, greasing the skids. You know, sort of like we knew eventually we had to go for crowdfunding, and so you know, we were budgeting our time, so to speak, to make sure that we could pivot from a grant-funded model to a crowd-funded model. Right. That was always in our sort of thoughts and plans in the long term, and we're transparent about that to NLNet. We had conversations like, is this a conflict of interest? Did we raise money? Blah, 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 whatever. So, you know, we made sure that the messaging was coordinated and we're all above board. No one felt like we're trying to pull a fast one on anyone. And then the other thing is that in terms of the crowdfunding itself, so the main thing is that even if you don't go the grant route, there are many things you can crowdfund that are not very capital intensive. So if you just look at like Crowd Supply site, they sell things like USB condoms, they call them. They're just little circuit boards that cut the TX and RX line, so you can charge a phone and know that no one can get it. There's not a lot of R&D behind that. The thing's brilliant, right? And it sold actually, I think, quite a bit of units. I think it was profitable at the end of the day for the maker, right? So there's a lot of little ideas actually that you can do, and there's no shame in sort of maybe doing things. You have a bigger vision, but you can do these smaller sort of vignettes, almost like I have an aspect of my project that is immediately usable. I want to make a breakout board for it, or I want to do a section. So if you have a very large project that needs a lot of money, you can break it into smaller pieces that you can crowdfund in parts along the way and get validation for these different concepts. It's a long route. I mean, it's not like VC where you just get a pile of money and you just start, have a day and hire people and build the whole thing all at once, and it's boring and it's whatever the story they tell you is. But I think it's actually a more sustainable approach towards technology. In fact, if you think about the overall arc of Precursor, if I were to be honest, we started with a project called Be Trusted. It still exists, and the Precursor is literally named to indicate there's something else that comes after it. Precursor is a smaller part of a bigger project that we can't raise money for. I don't want to go BC for Be Trusted because there's an inherent conflict of interest in terms of trust and trustability in the device itself when you have that much external money involved. And so there's a big challenge I have in how do we do this very large vision of a fully trustable communications device with all the software layers and all the hardware layers, and eventually even custom silicon, right? How to do all that sort of stuff without sort of getting ourselves into sort of moral hazards in terms of the stewardship and ownership of the overall trajectory of things. And so Precursor itself was the idea is let's take an agnostic device. So this device, Be Trusted, would be essentially a software layer on the Precursor device, and we would call it Be Trusted to be an out-of-the-box experience that inexperienced users who know nothing about technology can use and stay safe, right? This is not this device today. This is a development platform. It's a precursor to Be Trusted, right? And we were very clear about that. We marketed it and we turned it into a smaller, bite-sized piece that didn't have the software layer. It was actually substantially expensive to develop. And we can sell the hardware itself to a bunch of people who are really excited to make their own mods on it, right? And hopefully, even if our goal is to build a trustable communications device, if someone from the cryptocurrency community decides this is a great crypto wallet, I'm not going to say no to it, right? I mean, I myself am not going to be a big user. I'm not sort of big into that area. That's not my wheel mill. But that's just they're essentially the crypto guys are funding trusted communications through this common platform. I think that's a really nice way to do it. It creates a durable user platform. We actually get more eyes reviewing it, right? And so you kind of make a big tent at the end of the day by carving off this little piece, and then hopefully building a sustainable platform, and then building castles on top of solid foundations.
All right, and then we have one last quick question about the rough targets for minimum order quantities for the Precursor to benefit from significant economies of scale in manufacturing.
Yep. So that's an art. Unfortunately, it takes a little bit of experience to understand where the breakpoints are. There's an easy answer, which is like manufacturers will sell you things in whole reels of components, so like usually 3,000 or 4,000. That's actually a very clear economic breakpoint. We were not going to get there. We knew we weren't going to get there, right? And so we had to set something small in that amount. We're actually still buying from distribution, partial reels and whatnot. And for me, it was more about what could we fit realistically in terms of amortizing the tooling costs. So I take the injection molding, I take the sample costs, I take the EMC compliance costs, the setup costs, the prototyping costs of all the prototyping units to get to production, test jigs, logistics also. So sum together, create a number, right? Add it together with the component cost, divided by amount, and try to play with it until we got to like a no-go number, right? Basically, I didn't want to lose money at the end of the day doing a production run, even buying all the components essentially off the shelf. And there's there's a little bit of economy of scale. Some components did get a bit cheaper once we got to like a few hundred units, but you really don't really see that sort of the real fat of that kick in until you get to about 10,000 plus units. There's no way we're going to get to that level, right? So a lot of people ask, like, is there a way to make this thing cheaper? I said, yeah, if someone would just step in and finance a build of 10,000 or 100,000 of these, we can make it half the price, right? No problem, right? That's what economy of scale is. But then I would be going to a VC trying to raise, $5 million to underwrite inventory that may never get sold, right? And then we have to, then we'd be obligated to someone to sort of put an application on it, and we start loading ads on it to recover costs, like, tracking people, selling user information. That's when you get into like these terrible decisions that founders get into with VC, because you took all this money to get you to this wonderful price point, you got all these users, you can't make your ends meet, and so now you have to make these deals with the devil in terms of like privacy and security. A lot of companies start with the best intentions and end up going down that path, and just, it's not a good story at the end of the day.
Great. Thanks a lot for your talk and for your time today. We really appreciate it. There were a lot of great insights shared by you today, and I hope all of you joining as well, you got some tips and tricks on how to think about your crowdfunding if that's the route you want to go. So Bunnie, thanks again.
Yep. Thanks. See you guys later.
All right, and that brings us to the end of today's webinar. We're very grateful that you have been with us. Thank you so much to both Melanie and Bunnie for your inspiring talks. And as mentioned, then as this webinar was also recorded, then it will be made available as well afterwards. Once more, just to remind you that please use the Calendly link if you want to get the one-on-one mentoring with Melanie. As I mentioned, this first come, first serve basis. If there are some slots left over, I will share the link with Joost so you can sign up within this week. And I think Joost, and I also wanted to mention that there's a short poll that if you have time, we'll be very grateful if you give us a bit of feedback about this webinar. Joost, do you also have some final comments?
Yes. First of all, thank you, Grete, for moderating, managing the entire webinar. I think it went really well, and thank you for keeping track of the questions. The chat moved along quite fast, so you've done a wonderful job there. Indeed, thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Bunnie and Melanie, for very insightful, very in-depth presentations. This is a very broad and many-sided topic, so I think we really went in depth into a lot of important aspects of it. Indeed, the poll is in the shared notes as well as in the public chat. Just click on it. It's a bit long form. It's not entirely a format. It's from Framasoft, which is also an open source developing a community and organization that we're funding, but it should allow you to fill in your thoughts on the webinar. The webinar indeed was recorded, and we will make it available, I think, sometime this week. I will get started on that as soon as possible. So everyone who wasn't able to join can still check it out. And thank you all for joining. And keep checking out the website, our website of NLNet and of NGI Tetra, to keep up to date on the coming webinars and events, and hope to see you there. And for now, everyone, have a nice day and see you soon.
All right, have a great day, everyone. Next webinar is on October 5th, together with NGI Zero and Pointer.
Be there.
Bye.